What's good, YouTube? It's me, your boy Squiddy, back again with another video. You already know. I see a lot of people not playing certain hand traps, and it's just like, I feel like this is a good spot where certain hand traps people have actually forgotten about. People always make the assumption that a certain hand trap is bad, and then they're like, oh, okay, we're not going to play this card. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, people are just not playing around this card. They're not respecting it because they assume that everyone forgot about it. So let's talk about some hand traps that I think might be really powerful, at least for the format, the rest of the format as it's shaping up. NIBIRU the Primal Being. This is like the first one that I see a lot of people have actually dropped from their recipes. They've dropped this from their deck list because their assumption is that people are respecting Nib, people are starting to make a Rise Heart pass, so on and so forth. But the truth is, no one's doing that anymore. Everyone's going for the double Rise Heart play, so this is always live. Against the blind matchup, Cashier players are going for the lock 3, so in case you're playing Super Heavy Samurai, your Pendulum Zones are locked. And Super Heavy Samurai just can't play around this card. Obviously, they do have negates, but you have to have another hand trap paired with any hand trap in this format. It's just an accepted thing about this format is that you have to have 2 or more hand traps of a mixture, at least to have a chance at winning. And NIBIRU happens to be one of the highest impact hand traps that you can actually mix with another card like Effect Veiler, Ghost Spawner, or Imprim to turn off that Baron, that single Omni negate they have, and then blow out the rest of their board. And it's actually quite good as well against certain other rogue decks in the format. Mathmech, for example, they can't really play around it. They're doing all of their plays, making these huge boards. Sometimes they forego the Heat Soul line to go into the new Firewall card that sends, so they have the Cyburst, Deworm in the graveyard to negate, but then you can just drop a Nib and their entire turn ends. So this card I think is very, very high impact. No one's really playing around it. Cashier players are going to get punished. Even purely, like it's sometimes live against them and you can catch them off guard and still punish them. Sure, they get to add back 3 cards with my friend Purely, but it doesn't really matter because a lot of times they're not able to get Noir access, which puts you in a really good spot. And that deck actually has to rely on its resources. If they use Purelies on the turn 1, then that means even if they add back cards, they only have so many more Purely targets in their deck to summon out, and it's going to be harder and harder for them to make Noir after they get Nibiru'd. Borderline impossible, because if they don't have like another access to Purely plus the access to Plump with the Delicious in their hand, then they're just not able to get 5 materials, right? So I feel like Nib is kind of forgotten right now. If you guys have any events coming up in the next little bit, I would definitely consider maining this card because everyone's kind of going to get caught off guard by it. Next card is Ghost Bow and Haunted Mansion. I see a lot of people are actually not siding this. I'm just like, how, guys? You have to side at least 2 or 3 copies of this. It's either this or the Bystials because you have to stop like rogue decks like Mathmech, cards that rely on their graveyard. Even against things like Labyrinth, Ghost Bow kind of puts in work because it can stop Big Welcome Labyrinth. This is like a big deal with a lot of cards that are interacting with their graveyard, so being able to stop that is very good. In fact, the only deck that's really bad against is Cashier and Purely because they don't really interact, but Purely still has my friend Purely that can add back 3 cards from the graveyard, so you can turn that off and then disallow them to get like a +3 right away. Against Cashier, it does have some crossover. It's live against Birth, but that's really about it, so it's obviously not great. But this card is nice because it can be used defensively as well. You can stop things like Called by the Grave, you can stop things like even Cyframe Gear Gamma. Like Gamma has to special summon from the graveyard, but even if they don't have Driver in the grave, it can still be stopped by Ghost Bell. It's a legal activation, so you can chain to stop the Gamma if you want to push through a certain effect, just like you can Ash. And you can also stop things like DD Crow that are also somewhat prevalent in the format. Like certain people are actually side decking DD Crow. You can stop the Bystials. This is a very, very nice card that stops also the Mathmech trap, right? Like this is a big deal in the format. So I would say definitely side this card if you guys aren't siding Bystials already. Like please guys, put this in your deck. We just mentioned DD Crow, but this is actually a card a lot of people are actually forgetting about. It's actually quite good. It's a little bit low impact against the decks that it's playable against, but it's still good enough where I think that it has a lot of crossover. It's potentially catch them off guard, and it's just another hand trap that goes well with other hand traps. So it stops a lot of things right off the bat. We're stopping things like the Pearly Lily, the effect to target a name in the graveyard to go in their XYZ. Chaining a DD Crow on that is quite good because you're foregoing them from going into Noir potentially. You're stopping Purely Lily, which is like a big part of their play. It's a big component. So I quite like that. You can obviously stop Mathmech Sigma. You can stop things like that. And then against Super Heavy Samurai Scarecrow, you can stop that. So it's effectively an Effect Veiler that's a little bit better because you're actually getting rid of the Soul Piercer or whatever target they choose to in the graveyard. Alternatively, you could get rid of Super Heavy Samurai Bike potentially if you're at the point where they've already gotten access to the XL Stratus Synchro. So being able to stop cards like that instantly is quite nice. And the fact that it can be used in any phase is always very nice. You can use it in draw phase for whatever reason. And it's just a highly effective card. It's an older hand trap, so it's not once per turn either. So I think a lot of people should be considering this card. If you guys don't have any of these, definitely pick them up while they're cheap. Let's talk about some other cards that is a little bit weird, but you guys might hate me for this, but Fantastic Dragon Phantasmay. This is a card that's been completely forgotten. No one's really talking about this card anymore because it's not that good against decks. Nowadays, everyone just XYZ summons and Kashtira. They're not a lot of link monsters, but the decks that are actually good, let's take a look at the ban. Like, the ban list is probably going to come out in some capacity by the end of this month, and Kashtira is probably going to get neutered. So what does that leave us with? Probably Super Heavy Samurai, Purely, and then some rogue decks like Mathmech. And this just happens to be good. Things are shaping up that Super Heavy Samurai is probably going to be the best deck in the format after the ban list, and they're always going to go into Super Heavy Samurai Scarecrow. So if you have Phantasmay, you have the option off one lone Phantasmay to draw into more hand traps, and it also puts a body on your board. So being able to fix your hand, getting rid of bricks like Sideframe Gear Driver, if you happen to draw that, getting rid of bricks that you don't want to see, sculpt your hand so you can build out board breakers or even draw into more hand traps, I think is ultra important. It's basically only bad against decks that don't link summon, so against things like Branded, Purely, for example. But I think if Super Heavy Samurai is going to shape up to be the best deck, then why not have that space to play Phantasmay while it also has crossover against Mathmech? You can draw potentially 3 cards against that deck, sometimes even 4 if they get really greedy and try to go for like a huge push to 3 links. So why not? You're going to be able to draw 2 cards, put 1 back, you're fixing your hand, and it's a Pot of Greed that puts a monster on the board. So in my opinion, I think you guys should definitely consider this. It could be a card that you could make room in your side deck for if you have space. There might be cards that are better, but still this is like something I wanted to bring up because a lot of people have forgotten the existence of this card. Let's talk about Cosmic Cyclone. I don't see a lot of people siding this anymore. I still think it's very good going first. You side this in, it hits a lot of things. It's the interrupt for a lot of the starters that are in the format, okay? There are things like my friend Pirelli being able to Cosmic Cyclone, and the nicest thing about Cosmic is it actually dodges Sideframe Gear Gamma, right? It's not a monster effect, so like they have a blank board. They're not committing any monsters to the board. They're trying to bait out the Gamma, but you can just use Cosmic Cyclone to get rid of something as opposed to something like a Ghost Ogre, which just gets Gamma. So getting that 1-for-1 is very, very nice. It also hits Wakushi, which is very, very powerful as well. Has crossover against the trap decks, and then going first, it also hits other things like Kashtira Birth. Against Kashtira also, when they activate the Wraithos, the field spell is their first play. I love to Ash that. I love to Cosmic it because that deck breaks a lot, right? Like, they have to resolve 1 card to get their engine rolling, and a lot of times they just have hand traps and non-engine, so being able to Cosmic Cyclone that is very, very nice in my opinion. And then the last cards are a no-brainer, but guys, Triple Tactics Talent and also Triple Tactics Thrust. I don't see a lot of people main decking this anymore, but I just think this is a format that's coming up that you have to play these cards because there's so many hand traps coming and flying around. It's definitely going to be a hand trap format. Like, once Kashtira goes especially, all these hand traps are going to see more play than ever. We're already seeing Purely and the Super Heavy Samurai obviously play a bunch of hand traps, Mathmech as well. And once Kashtira is completely out of the metagame, I think that hand traps are going to thrive very, very well because hand traps aren't that good against Kashtira as it is. Board breakers are often a little better to get rid of the Rise Heart, but once that deck's out of the format, these hand traps are going to thrive even further. So guys, you should be main decking Triple Tactics Thrust or Talent in some capacity. Thrust has that nice crossover. You can set certain traps that are good against the decks, so things like the opponent or even D-Barrier, because D-Barrier is quite good against Purely. It shuts down basically all of their plays. And there are a bunch of cards that you can set. It also is like an engine starter because you can search for things like terraforming and just like start your engine, right? So like being able to set like a power card like D-Barrier is always very, very powerful in my opinion. And then Thrust is also very nice because you're able to play during the main phase when a lot of those hand traps actually hit. The only bad thing about Talents is that typically, if you're playing a deck like Purely, sometimes you do your things in draw phase to play around Drill Knockbird. So if they hand trap you there, Talents isn't live, whereas Thrust is, so you get that little bit of marginal benefit. But the nice thing about Talents is you don't really get Draw Knockbird, which Thrust does, so you're forced to set something as opposed to adding it. With Talents, you can either choose to break their board or you can look at their hand. But I see a lot of people are not main decking these cards. I think this is a time to main deck them now more than ever with the hand traps flying around. So it's just something to consider. That's about all I had for the video. If you guys like this, definitely let me know. And we will see you in the next video where we'll talk about some more hand traps. See you guys.